Hello and welcome to this MCT podcast. I'm Jonathan Brown, and this is the second of three conversations that I'm hosting with Brian Kardon and Nick Hahn from InVision. Hi, Brian. Hi, Nick.
How are you, Jonathan?
Hello.
Great. So in this conversation today, I'm hoping that we can talk about design systems, and I think there's a lot of interest in what that is. What is a design system? So why don't we start with that very simple question? What is a design system?
So it's a great question, and it's very topical. It's a hot topic. It's something that many companies are trying to figure out right now. Like many trends in design that have happened over the last 20 or 30 years, from user experience design, UX becoming a thing, agile development, design systems is really the next generation of improving the way in which we work together and build products at scale. For a long time, design has been kind of a craft that small teams do together or individuals do, especially in the UI world where you're maybe making one screen or a set of screens and then handing that off to a development team to go make. Design systems are a way to build repeatable, really well done experiences for all your products across your entire organization. We can get into the nitty-gritty little details of what that means, but generally it's helping design scale.
So design at scale, is that also connected to the idea of a distributed team, or is that a different issue to talk about?
I think they're very much related. An analogy is, right now they're giving out the Nobel Prizes for economics and physics. And 30 or 40 years ago, Nobel Prizes typically were awarded to one person working alone. And they've looked at people that have won Nobel Prizes, and almost all of them are now teams, people working with other people around the world. And we're finding that great work happens through collaboration, this amplification effect. And that's particularly true in design, both in the ideation, the creation of design, but also you have to hand it off to someone to actually write code and make it execute it.
Yeah, and actually I have an analogy to go there as well. If you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen and show you just a quick visual. This is I found a lot of folks who are getting into design systems, especially design teams, they start with a particular set of elements in their design system. And a lot of teams start with this idea of having colors and fonts and typography, the spacing grids, all that fun stuff. They say, all right, I'm going to standardize on these types of things, and then I'm going to make some basic components like buttons, tabs and whatnot. And really, these things are used by designers and developers. So design systems, we designers like naming everything design thinking, design systems. I don't know why we do that, kind of, kicks us in the wrong way sometimes. But design systems aren't meant to be used just by designers. They're meant to be used by the whole, digital product team. And so, it really does include APIs and things that are called design tokens as well. But really, where design systems get very interesting and much more of the people side of things is when you start writing the guidelines of how to use those components, and then the governance of it. And this word governance is a really interesting word because in some design circles, people don't like that word because it's sort of this, why are you telling me what to do? Why are you governing me? But what this does is help design teams not have to reinvent the wheel every single time they go to make a new page that's similar to a previous page that another team did. And how do they communicate? How do you contribute back to the design system? All those pieces are built into that. If you look at the way manufacturing happened in cars and any physical goods, really, every single car that was built before the manufacturing line was hand-built. You had a team of craftspeople, somebody who can bend the fender and somebody who can make the engine and put the body on the frame and all the pieces that had put it together. But every single team had to have those craftspeople. Very expensive, both to hire the right people, to train them up, and it was very difficult to scale. You couldn't make cars for cheap, and you couldn't get people have access to cars very easily because they were so expensive to make. And quality was very disparate. You could have one car made by a team that was really high quality and the same model of car leave the factory that was maybe poor quality because it was difficult to control. But as we move into this assembly line moment, design systems enable us to, build something really well once and test it really, really well. And then everybody who's going to build a UI that needs a table component or a login form or whatever those basic pieces are can just reuse those. And now design teams don't have to spend the majority of their time reinventing the wheel. They can spend the majority of their time focusing on real world problems for their particular customers. And design teams and engineering teams end up looking more like this, where they're more centralized, where they're working on aspects of the early stage or mid stage of a production. And then once those pieces are standardized, tested, then everyone gets access to them.
So it's overall helping you to achieve a consistency both in design, but in quality of the work that you can produce.
Correct. There's a nuance there in the word. We've actually, in the design system space, have been moving away from consistency, and I have to catch myself saying it. Sometimes consistency makes teams feel like everything has to look exactly the same all the time, and that kind of makes people in the UI or the product teams feel really constrained. So the word we've been using is cohesive. So if you have a mobile app for a bank and a website for the bank, they don't have to be identical, consistent. They have to feel like a cohesive experience. And so I'm not sure if that will translate well, but that's really the purpose, is to be a cohesive.
A craftsperson, I think you said earlier. Does this mean that design work is less interesting? What's the implication for that person's satisfaction in what they can do?
That's a great question, and it comes up quite often. And when I was first involved of building out design systems at companies myself, I'd have many, especially earlier career designers worry about this, and they felt that their value was in creating wireframes or creating those final designs. And a lot of that work would be recreating things that had already been made in other UIs. The difference now is that instead of having 5 or 6 teams all creating a table component and spending endless hours debating with their engineering team on should the table have stripes, or should the table have removable columns, or should I be able to filter in certain ways, instead of every team having that same debate over and over again, you can consolidate that debate, make a decision as a large organization, and then everyone gets that value. Now the design team can actually spend time thinking about, well, what does my user really need? Maybe I should spend time talking to my users. Now, instead of spending 80% of my time noodling on a wireframe, I can spend 20% of my time doing that and 80% of my time talking to my stakeholders, talking to other roles within my organization, engineers and product managers, and then getting out of the building and talking to customers and users that will actually consume it. I got into a really great argument with an engineer one time, and he wanted to put a feature in the user interface without any sort of testing, or he just thought it'd be a great thing to put in. In fact, he put it in and almost got it launched. So we pushed back, and I was like, we haven't shown this. We don't even know what problem we're solving with this new feature. And he goes, well, Nick, in all your design years and your wisdom, you should know what it is that customers want and if this is going to work or not. And I said, actually, the thing I've learned in all my years of design wisdom is that I actually don't know. And that when I do pretend that I do know, I almost always get it wrong. But that's what's great about design systems, is you get to test things at scale instead of testing things in little isolated pieces.
Great designers love testing. And I think your idea of what a designer does, this creation, is interesting. There's designing for how it looks, but real designers design for how it works. Exactly. And you really want to incorporate lots of user research into it. I also want to talk about the benefits of design systems, not just for the individual designer, but for the design leader. This idea of creating, which designers want to do, versus recreating. So it's very frustrating to designers. They're building a little illustration or a little thing. Well, it's been done 12 other times across the world with other designers. They're not aware of that. And so some of these analyst firms, like where we used to work at Forrester or Gartner, they talk about AI-assisted design. So there's Jonathan with a pen starting to draw a little telephone or something, and immediately pops up 6 other telephone illustrations, icons, that have been approved already. And so you just choose one. And I think for design leaders, they seeing a great unlock of productivity. Like, I don't want to recreate that icon or that component or that button or that animation. We already have an approved set of these components, but I want them to work on the cool new things. I do think there is a benefit, a disproportionate benefit to a large organization, almost like a hyperbolic, as the organization grows, if there are 3 people in a room designing something, it's a lot simpler than if you have 1,500 designers around the world like Goldman Sachs does or Bank of America or Google does, that you really want to have more coordination. But Nick, I'm curious if you see equal benefits regardless of size of organization.
Not quite equal. I do think there is. I do think there's more benefit for larger organizations. There's also significantly more work and coordinating between people to get agreement that this is the system we're going to use. We're at the state in the industry where most big companies have started design systems, and oftentimes they'll have 5 to 10 design systems floating throughout their whole company. Because you'll get a team of 15 people and say, hey, we can't keep recreating the wheel. We're going to make a design system. But they don't know that other people in the organization have already started making a design system.
Who should be the owner of this initiative?
What do you think, Brian? Who have you seen as far as owners?
Well, a new title is emerging, and there's actually a title called Design Operations, which has its analogy. There's marketing operations, sales operations, financial operations, now design operations, which really is pulling the whole workflow together. And so very often that resides in the design team reporting into the design leader. That's what I'm seeing, Nick. Are you seeing something similar?
Yes, design ops is a big deal. And what's nice is development has had DevOps for quite a few years now. And so those teams are fairly mature. And so design teams are having to go, how are the development teams doing in running those roles, and how can we mirror that? But then it's really about them working together to collectively, because design systems, when they really, really add the most value, are when they are design components and coded components, so that any development team can pick up a pre-coded component and drop it in their UI. That's where the value just skyrockets. So getting development teams on board. One of the things that on a real low level I've seen as a transition point is when designers sit down to work and they've got to work on a new interface. Do they start by looking to their peer, whether they're physically sitting together or online, remote, and go, hey, can you send me your last design file? I'm going to start using that to build my new design. If they start there, that's a failure point, because now you're now branching off and creating more kind of unchecked diversity or unchecked organic growth, where you're not creating a system. So a design system, the designer should sit down and go, I'm going to open up the design system and grab my components and elements from there. And once that flip happens, now you start building momentum.
Really, what are the pitfalls?
I think teams that think they have to have all the buy-in, have to have all the components, have to have everything figured out before they have a design system. Just recently, I heard this great quote from somebody who said, from Dan Mall, who's one of our collaborators at another company. He said, if you have one component that every team in your company uses, you have a design system, right? Like, that's more important to have everybody using it, or most people using it, than having an entire massive library of hundreds of components that are fully documented and having 1 or 2 teams using it. It's
how long does it take to get to value? Yeah.
Really, you can get to value as soon as you get the first component that everyone can reuse. And that doesn't take a whole lot. Like, a lot of teams now have created, essentially online digital style guides, and that's kind of a precursor to a design system. So there's definitely value there. Getting to value is multiple months, if not. I think you can get a bit of value up front, but Brian, like you said, that sort of logarithmic value scale kicks in once more and more and more people. So it really just matters how long do those individual teams have the bandwidth to start using the system. It can be done pretty aggressively. I would say if the whole company rally behind it and put a ton of resources, it could be done in under a year. If not, it's going to be something that just you roll out over time. It's like when you want to remodel, you don't remodel your whole house at the same time. Like you might do 2 or 3 rooms with a kitchen and different parts of it. Think about it like,
where, let's say it's Disney, we don't do it wall to wall across the Walt Disney Company. We'll start with Disney theatrical or Disney features or Disney animation. You do it within a self-contained group, and within 6 to 8 months, the designers there are saying, I love this. And then it spreads throughout the companies.
Okay. There's a lot of companies that have done well. There's one recent example in South Africa, a bank called Nedbank, and we partnered with them over the last year to help deploy their design system. What's fascinating right now is I'm seeing many banks adopt design systems. They're almost leapfrogging because they had very low maturity design organizations, and when they invested in design leaders and designers, they decided, let's do design systems to start. And so there's less kind of reverse engineering to get that going. So they're jumping ahead of a lot of other folks out there who are trying to start design systems now. I think there's a lot of people that value the customer experience, and the design of the user interface drives a lot of that customer experience, because how often do we go into the bank and talk to somebody anymore? Most of our banking is done through a screen.
Yeah. I met the head of design at Goldman Sachs at a dinner about a year ago when I first joined InVision, and he was clearly a business person. He was not a Michelangelo or a Picasso and drawing beautiful things, but he thought he had design thinking, and he was running a very large organization. So there's been a lot written about design being elevated and being a new competitive advantage for companies that embrace it and do it well.
That's great, because I think the third topic, the third conversation that we're going to have is about exactly that, the value of design.
When companies have multiple design systems, that's actually a great point, because now you've realized that there's people that care about building a system. And if you can get those people together, and this is where executives come in and play a really important role, empower those teams, give them an objective to bring those things together and have them work together. So the worst thing a design system can feel like when they go wrong is when one team has all the power and they dictate all the rules and force others to use it. That's when you get competing systems, because team B that's forced to use it I don't like your decision, I'm going to build my own. And you end up with warring factions.
Could, Jonathan, just 2 points. One is clearly having a single system of record for design has a network effect. If everyone's on the same place, everyone's working, everyone's seeing everything. So sometimes there are legacy systems that have to be sunsetted and people feel very emotional. They built them. I think we replace very often our InVision design system manager with homegrown things. And very often it keeps the IT department, fully active. And so they have a vested stake in writing code and keeping these old things up to speed. So sometimes that's an internal challenge we have to be. But it feels to me like these are very early days for design systems. And we've seen analogies in other parts of organizations. I think about when I started my career, most companies did not have one accounting system. They had 6 different accounting systems. Things were in Excel spreadsheets. They were in VisiCalc. They were here, there. And now people have consolidated, because you realize the network effect of everyone, whether it's approvals, people seeing things, a system of record. I think about CRM. Sales had, there were different databases for customers all over the place. That was very inefficient. There was a network effect. And the third one is marketing automation, the field that I'm from, where you settle in on a system of record for marketing, whether it's Eloqua or Marketo or another system. So I think those are much more evolved categories. I think we're just sort of in the very early part of this evolution, and it's very exciting to see. But I see very similar things happening in this category as have happened in other categories with consolidation.
Excellent. Well, that I think is a wrap for that discussion on what is a design system. So thank you very much, guys, and I look forward next time to talking to you about the value of design itself. So thank you.